Go.
My man, awesome episode with Alan Snap Greer. Love the origins of his call sign. You got to listen to hear what they
Yeah.
are. Pretty funny story. That was a good one. I really enjoyed that. But more than that, I absolutely loved all the gold bombs in this episode. Specifically, the Joy Fortress was one that I really resonate to, and the 4 points you made of how to truly pursue joy, and some of the things he talked about: transparency, vulnerability, gratitude, deep, meaningful relationships, and faith. And so that was just something that really hit home for me, and also has some great practical action items associated to it.
Absolutely, man. Hey, leaders, all leaders, listen to this episode because it will change your mindset towards how you show up for people, how you lead people. It's important. Let's go listen.
You're listening to Filling the Storehouse podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Stuart, and we want to walk with you on the journey to living the abundant life through faith, family, and freedom. Our goal is to refine our why while helping you find yours. Together, achieve our best and highest purpose. In the end, we'll drive each other to intentionally fill our storehouse.
All right. We've got another Naval Aviator on the call today. I'm pretty stoked about this conversation. Snap, first, before we kind of get into the more of your story, can you explain how you got the call sign Snap? I've never asked you this question. I'm curious where it came from.
Yeah, so I'm actually the only guy I know that has a call sign from not drinking. And so we were in
Nice.
we were in Fallon, and it was a bachelor party. And I had spent the night before with my aunt and uncle, so I show up late, and everybody had been over consuming. And so they were making fun of me because I didn't want to drink. I wanted to go hiking. And so it stands for Sensitive New Age Pilot. But so
That's hilarious.
so they were making fun of me for abstaining from alcohol.
Sensitive New Age Pilot. I love that. That's good.
That's good.
That's good.
That's good. Well, dude, welcome to the podcast, man. I'm excited
Well,
about our
and in
conversation.
case our guests want to know
Yeah.
who, if you Google Snap, you're probably not going to find this amazing individual. So
You might find him on LinkedIn.
Alan
'cause
Greer.
It does show on LinkedIn, Alan Snap Greer.
It does.
Yeah. Because I only know you as Snap, honestly, from all of our interactions in naval aviation world. I only know you as Snap. So, yeah, man. Hey, thanks for coming on the podcast. Really excited about the
I
conversation.
appreciate the invite.
Yeah, man. So for our audience, for our listeners, could you just give a little bit more of a background besides your call sign of who you are and what you do now?
Sure. So I started my Navy career enlisted, running nuclear reactors. Did that for a couple of years. I got picked up for a officer program, transitioned, and I flew S3s. So that resulted in me having another transition. After S3s, I was a T-45 instructor in Meridian, Mississippi, teaching advanced fighter training. And then after that, transitioned to VR, where I flew C-40s like used to, and then retired in 2020, middle of the pandemic. That was fantastic. And so I had a job for about a year, but it wasn't really meeting my needs for chasing a calling. So I started a business. And in my business, I still support primarily naval aviation for mishap incident and casualty response, as well as leadership development training through psychological safety discussions.
Nice, man. Yeah. So when we started kind of first interacting, I was in Fort Worth. You were at the wing, and you were the safety officer. You were the guy that no one wanted to actually like come and have, to our command and do an inspection, if you will, on all things safety. But now that's actually worked out for you really well in your current career. And I want to get into that a little bit more from that transition from a military job to now what you're doing. And essentially you created this new job for yourself, which is really, really cool. But I want to go back a little bit more into that, and the story of why and where you came from there.
Sure. So I went to safety school in 2008. And one of the things that really stood out to me when I went to safety school was they basically said, okay, so all you lieutenants that have no experience, we need you to build a pre-mishap plan. And my question was, how am I even remotely qualified to do something as nuanced and complex as that? And so I got back to the command and set out to accomplish that. And one of the things that really stood out was we had a suicide. And because we weren't really prepared to deal with the suicide, we actually used the ground pre-missile plan to kind of get us pointed in the right direction for suicide. And so kind of through this, I recognized that there's a lack of standardization and a lack of preparedness in dealing with crisis response. And so I had done that, and then I show up to VR, and I had the safety stink on me, so they put me straight into safety. So now I'm trying to standardize how we do safety for a squadron that operates independent and globally. So because I had done that well, then they sent me to the wing to standardize the wing. And then after I had standardized the wing, then they decided to send me to CNAFR to standardize the reserves. And from there, I got pulled into AirPac to standardize mishap response for naval aviation.
Don't you love that? Like the Navy's like, here, go do this job that no one knows how to do. Just go figure it out. And then once you did, you had some success in that, and then you got stuck there. And then it's like standard Navy, man. It's good.
It is standard Navy, and but it's worked out really well. And so one of the ways I kind of describe my Navy career is it's a pattern of not getting what I want and having it work out really well anyways. And so that just kind of happened over and over. And now I'm just the blessed man I know. So life's good.
I think that's a matter of mindset too, right? I think if you approach especially something like the Navy, you go into every job, because I used to joke all through, from starting to ending my career as a CO. I think the only training I ever got was the CO school. It was always planned, right? It was always like, hey, we're going to send you to this collection manager school, and we're going to get boned up on that. Okay, sorry, you got to report. Oh, we're going to get you some training on this XO job, but no, you got to report. And this sub thing, we're going to get you spun up on that. Actually, why don't you just go deploy and figure it out? Right. That was always my career. But in the CO school, I'm 100% convinced that the only reason I got it is because it's legally mandated that you have to do that in order to take command. Like, I think that is the only reason, because they delayed it. And even that was kind of a goat rope, but it had to happen. So I went. But all that being said, I think the mindset of going into these situations open-minded with, I may not have got exactly what I wanted, but I'm going to make the best of this situation. It really opens other doors, right? You can become proficient in something that you may end up loving or not, and you change it or you make it better, and you can really thrive and succeed in that. And it looks like you've taken that and also carried all that with you to the civilian life, and are still making a huge impact.
Yeah. So one of the things that, and I absolutely agree, but when I was enlisted, I had my class advisor basically told me that my personality really wasn't cut out for naval service. And so if I wanted to succeed, that I needed to start bringing solutions instead of problems. And I just kind of carried that forward. And so basically my career was an exercise of, hey, this isn't good. Let me build a tool to fix it. And it kind of worked out, and it overcame the fact that I am not really good at doing what I'm told. So that was kind of my saving grace.
That is, I think that is, if we took that attitude to all areas of our life, because I'll tell you, that was one of the rules as a CO. I said, hey, I will listen. I have like a 5-minute rule. And then we get into the grounds of, we're going to do something about it. But I said, you have 5 minutes to get all your complaints off your chest. I'll give you that 5 minutes, and then it's done. So make use of that time, because then we get into solution mode. So you can come complain, get it off your chest, feel better. We'll all feel great. And then we're getting into solution mode. And that's a rule. It's a standing rule that I kind of live by in that context. Right. But I love how you said that, because I think if we took a solution mindset, we would get rid of some of this victim stuff that we deal with, and that's heavy, and it keeps us in a quagmire, and we can't get out of it. And that solution mindset helps you to push forward. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I really credit that discussion to saving my career, because I was just not cut out to be a traditional person in the Navy, because I just kind of always felt like the rules didn't apply to me. And if I wasn't using that in a productive way, it certainly would have been very, very damaging to my potential in future for sure.
Well, I love this idea that you know talked about before we hit record of creating an environment in naval aviation specifically where um, the truth can survive.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that and this program that you've built out of psychological safety for the Navy specifically.
Sure. And so, I think that to get there, it's important to kind of step back a little bit.
Yeah.
As you and I have talked about, and I've plastered all over social media. In 2016, I was suicidal, and so as part of the recovery from that process, there were two elements that I was trying to do. One, how do I prevent myself from ever getting there again? And so I did a lot of research, absorbed a lot of content, but then kind of bigger than me, it's how can I use my story to make a difference for naval aviation? And so psychological safety, it's something that first came about in the 1960s. Project Aristotle from Google is, I think, what really brought it to the forefront of people's awareness. And Dr. Amy Edmondson, she's a Harvard Business School professor. She's widely recognized as kind of the leading thinker on the impact of psychological safety on organizational success. And so what I've kind of done is operationalize that idea. So how do we apply the idea of psychological safety in an operational context? And so as I looked at my career, you look at it from a safety perspective, you could walk into any command within the Navy and there are things that some junior enlisted sailor knows that the skipper should know for safety or operational excellence and doesn't because they're afraid to speak up. As I look at my suicide journey, I was afraid to tell anybody the truth because I was afraid of the consequences. I hadn't hit 20 years yet. Would that cost me my pension? I'd certainly lose my flight pay if the flight surgeons knew how dark my internal reality was. But then you start playing that forward, and there's other areas, say like sexual assault, which I spend a lot of time talking about as well. Well, in an environment that is transparent and open, destructive behaviors just can't survive. And so that's why I've kind of focused my efforts on these four topics of suicide, sexual assault from a negative prevention perspective. And then on the positive, how do we optimize innovation? And how do we also optimize operational excellence? And an important part of that is safety. And I really believe it comes down to a mindset shift where historically leaders were kind of perceived as the know-it-all. They're expected to know everything. They just can't. And so terms I use are vertical and horizontal expertise. And so how do you take your maintainer that has vertical expertise, to have a lot of nuanced understanding, and how do you get that information to the decision makers so that the CEO has the data, has the insight to make the best possible decision based on resources, operational constraints, and what have you? And for me, psychological safety is kind of the mechanism to make that happen. And
so there's
one of my
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, so one of my most deeply held beliefs is that success is a team sport. And when you're looking at really, really high performing teams, one of the things they really have is just kind of this human connection. And high performing teams allow truth to exist. And that's, in my opinion, is a big part of why they're high performing, is because, hey, we actually have the facts on the playing field. So now we can, instead of playing pickup basketball later when something surprises us, we actually have the information ahead of time because people knew and we gave them an opportunity to speak up.
There's so much there,
Yeah,
like just pure gold. And I'm sitting here trying to keep up with what you're saying with notes. One thing you said is you talked about transparency and open cultures. that allow for, or that do not allow for destructive behaviors to exist. And I'm curious from a developing a culture perspective, because one of the things, at least in the military, but even in our businesses, that is a huge challenge. Is one, there's constant change of the CO, and specific to military. And so, how do you create these? How do you actually create a culture that's enduring? And in our businesses, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this. How do you create a culture that's enduring, and as you grow and scale or move or change, that is something that can survive your departure or you changing roles?
Yeah. So I think that the first real thought process there is, what's the timeline that we're talking about? And so I think it's impossible to build a lasting culture in 6 months. I don't know how long it takes, but I think we have this idea, typical 15-month CO tour. In my opinion, the most enduring change that a CO can make probably won't impact that CO's squadron or that CO's command. The most enduring change they can make is by who they rank in such a way that they'll be then selected. And so I actually think that the way that you really drive from a military perspective a long-term shift in paradigm is to be much more deliberate about the types of personality characteristics that are up for promotion. Are we promoting the person that is the best tactically, or are we really promoting the best leaders? And I've heard kind of one definition of leadership is, a great leader is the type of leader that can create another leader who then can go on and create another leader. And so if we're really looking at leadership perspective, in my career, I don't know that I was judged often on leadership. I was judged on tactics. And so as you promote, that becomes relevant. Now, I think, from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's somewhat different, because often entrepreneurs stay with the organization for a long time. And then I think it's become selective hiring, because who you connect yourself with is incredibly important for who you become. I mean, we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So are we deliberate? Character traits. I can teach technical skills, but I think it's pretty tough to teach character traits to adults.
Yeah. So, and just to sum up, kind of what I heard you say is a level of intentionality in who we invest in both of these scenarios is really a recipe for the most enduring change or culture to establish. So who we pour into, whether it's through, military and you're advancing, your paper reflects not the guy who's been there the longest, right? And I talk to leaders about this, like, hey, it's not, we have to get out of that mindset. Just because you've been here the longest doesn't mean you're the best suited. And so right. Really, as a leader, pouring in and saying, okay, I see potential in this individual. And I think the civilian world does this a little better than we do in the military. But then even in our entrepreneurial ventures, who we pour into and being very intentional and selective there is really what can cause that enduring change. And so I love that, because there's something we can do about it, right? That's what I love about it. There's something we can do about it.
There is. But also I think something that's incredibly important to recognize, particularly when you're starting to develop a culture, is how fleeting the change can be if we destroy it. Because you can destroy this idea of psychological safety in an instant. And so the example I use is my wife and I we have a son. His name's Tanner. He just turned 9, and a couple of months ago he broke a wine glass, and he was trying to be helpful. He was washing the dishes. You may call that entrepreneurial. I'm going to call it helpful. And so he comes in and he's like, "Hey, I broke a wine glass." Well, in that moment, how I treat him is incredibly important. So if I punch him in the nose, physically, verbally, or with body language, I teach him 2 things that I don't want. The first is that it's unsafe for you to go above and beyond. And I think that's dangerous. But I think the more important thing is by how I respond to something undesirable as a father in that case, but you could apply it to leadership as well. If I teach him that I can't handle the truth won't exist. So while it's important to choose who we select, it's also important to prevent the negatives. And it's do not tolerate toxic leadership. It has to start with you, but it has to apply to everyone else.
That's so good, man. It's how we respond. And, from a parenting perspective, like one of my ultimate goals as a dad is I want my kids to feel comfortable at any time to come to me when there's a problem. And as they get older, those problems become bigger and bigger and bigger. Right. And so if my son comes to me at 2 a.m., and he's been drinking at a party and can't drive when he's 16 years old, I want him to come to me, and I want myself to be able to respond in a way that he will know that he can continue to come to me. Right.
Right. Yep.
And that same lesson applies to leadership. It applies to military. It applies to, running a business. I think that's excellent, man. But the problem is it's not that way, especially in the military right now. And this idea of like, even for like David and I, when and I'm sure you're the same way, like in aviation, at least, you hold everything back until the very, very end, right before retirement. And then you go and claim all of your, your ailments, your medical stuff, right? So you can get it all on your record right before you get out. Because there's no chance of like, getting downed or not being able to fly anymore or not making retirement. So, man, that is a big switch to flip, from going to this place where you can't tell anybody because you're so scared of what's going to happen to you, to a place where that truth can survive and you can still thrive as a leader in the military or a leader in an organization. What do we do? Like how can we, change this culture over time?
So I think that the important thing you just said is over time, because you're certainly not going to switch it right away.
Yeah, sure.
So I argue that there's actually, from like a naval aviation perspective, there's a couple of requirements. One is that senior leaders need to engage with Navy medicine, to your example, so that we can change that mindset from a medical and mental health perspective. But if you think back to all the squadrons you were in, there's also that same culture that exists in the maintenance shop. And so that becomes easier because we're not dealing with policy and we're not dealing with external organizations. Hey, senior chief, you will not treat the sailors badly, period. And so by having an absolute zero tolerance policy for toxic leadership, you can create elements of that locally. And I think it's really important to distinguish between local Navy and big Navy as you're thinking about culture changes. Now, for organizations, really the organizations that we're kind of dealing with, you're probably not consulting to Google, although they could have used some advice lately when they managed their debacle of a mass layoff. And so as you're thinking about smaller organizations, probably not looking at higher headquarter policies that are driving things. There are going to be laws and there's ethics and such, but it's probably not going to be mandated by somebody in an ivory tower somewhere. And so I think that from an entrepreneur perspective, you really have an advantage on driving cultural change because you're talking about a smaller group of people. And it's a lot easier to do with relationship than by edict.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge, a distinguisher, and it also can encourage us, right? I think there's, one of the things that when I was discouraged by was I was in this role as a CEO, but I truly felt that my scope of influence on the Navy and the bigger, community issues was non-existent. Just to be frank, and I was relatively vocal. I'd engage with the admiral, and if someone asked my opinion about the direction things were going, then I would give it truthfully. And I think the community I came from is not in a good place right now. And that's not David saying it. That's like Congress is getting involved and putting their hands into our community specifically. So that should tell you something about where you're the health of your community, right? And so there's a lot of room for conversation growth and that, but I just did not feel that I had a really any impact at that level. But
Sure.
what I took a lot of solace in was that I was impacting a bunch of officers who were in a position and who had the desire to progress to those stages. And the idea of pouring into them so much and genuine with a genuine desire that they become the best they can be has effect, like you said, has impacts that we will never see, but we do have the ability to do those things. And I think no matter what, whether it's in our house with our kids, your kids are going to say things and they're going to hurt you and they're going to disobey and they're going to do things, but we don't stop. We shouldn't stop and be discouraged. We should continue to pour into. So I appreciate that perspective on, encouraging leaders to, and that definition you said, I wrote it down. I wrote it a little bit differently, but the best leaders create leaders who create leaders. I love that, right? Because that gives you also a sense of hope and mission and purpose to be able to say, okay, I'm investing and I know this will have an impact, potentially, 3, 4, or 5 degrees of separation. So that's a great point.
Yeah. And so kind of to that point, the best time to plant an apple tree is a decade ago, right? And the next best time is right now. And so, we can't
It's
go
like
back
buying
and
real estate, right? It's like buying real estate.
That's right. I wish I would have bought America like a couple hundred years ago. So, but yeah, so that idea that I don't think it is, because we all have a sphere of influence. And one of the things that I think is really important from a success perspective, what's your definition of success? If the idea of making an impact on other people is not part of your definition of success, I think you're falling short of your potential in life. And so, if your idea is to, hey, we're going to make a difference, if your team is 5, you have the ability to do that. You just have to choose it.
Let's talk about this huge problem in the military, and how we can make a difference in that arena. And if you're willing to go there, let's talk about suicide. Let's talk about military suicide.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
David was the commanding officer. He had multiple suicides in his command. I was at a big reserve center. There were multiple suicides in my command. And you kind of went personally through it yourself. What is happening in the military right now, and why is it such a problem?
So I don't know that it's, necessarily a bigger problem in the Navy than in society at large.
Okay.
I think that one of the things that's happened in society at large, which obviously impacts the military as well, is with the advent of technology. It allows us to do amazing things. Like, we're in different places, yet we can have this discussion. But the flip side of that is we've lost human connection. And you add in social, where people have a very curated view of other people's lives. And I think that it's kind of a dangerous combination of, I'm not really connected and I'm viewing everyone else as having a much better life than me. And that guy that's driving a Porsche, what you don't recognize is he may want to wrap his that Porsche around a tree. And so without that actual deep human connection, I think that's problematic. And so throughout my career, one of the things I noticed from a leadership perspective is when I first enlisted, my leaders were very engaged with me. And by the end of my career, it was very much leadership by email. And so part of what I'm trying to drive through my discussions is a return to leadership by relationship. And so how is it that we can actually connect with humans? Because that's really what this is all about. I mean, it's just people, right? And how do we get connected deeply with people and be an example for people? And I think it's just that touch point, and getting back to having actual conversations, actually getting to know people. And so I think that's an important piece. So as you look at that, think about your career. How many times in your career were you actually ever taught in the military how to manage stressors, like financial management courses, totally worthless in the
Yeah.
military.
Yeah.
So when's the last time you had a course on maintaining relationships or leadership or anything else? And so when we have a generation of folks so Simon Sinek would say that the younger generation was raised with failed parenting strategies. So how do you take this generation of people that lacks a lot of the skills to handle tough scenarios, and then you put them in an environment where people don't actually really care about them? I think that kind of feeds into this. So part of the solution, I think, is teaching people skills. Hey, let's minimize relationship problems by working on relationship skills. Let's actually have real discussions about money so that your finances aren't a train wreck. And I think that reduces some of it. But I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to kind of purposer, but also relationships. And so who are you connected to? And so the question I would ask for the suicides that you talk about, Stu, David, for the suicides at your command, how many of those people felt deeply connected to other humans? My suggestion is zero.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what, has driven Stu and I to create, Storehouse and the Mastermind and these different things that we're doing, because it's a realization. And I had a conversation. I think I have a conversation every day with, I like to talk a lot. So someone's walking in the hallway and I'll stop and talk. And I had a conversation by the refrigerator with a woman yesterday, and we were just talking through the idea of this, and not even the idea, it's the reality that most men, and she was also offering it from a woman's perspective, just don't have friends. And a lot of us we check the friend box by saying, well, I got these guys at work and we're cool. And we, there's talk around the scuttlebutt, or there's, we have our, whatever it is. Right. But there's this idea that we're achieving this level of depth and relationship, but in reality, it's false. It's fake, right? I'm reading a Tribe right now, and it's fascinating on some of the stats he throws out. Not only, he uses Native Americans a lot, or actually he says Indians, because one other thing I'm passionate about is defining terms, right? And he talked to an Indian chief who said, no, Native American just implies that you were born in America. So I prefer Indian. I was like, oh, I love how we define that. Anyways, but when he talks about a lot of settlers who were pulled into the tribe either through whatever, kidnapping or whatever, and the number of them the very high number that did not want to go back into Western civilization, quote unquote, civilization and society. And he highlights that we're on this path of affluence and all these really good things that is literally causing us to, from a relational and societal perspective, we're devolving. And it was just a very interesting point. And you highlight it because I think a lot of us are lying to ourselves thinking that we do have these things, and we really don't. We don't have these people in our lives. And I think it's such an important point to be very intentional about, to define, and then to do something about, which you're doing right now. And at least just highlighting it, right? Sometimes all it takes is saying, hey, do you have any friends? And they say, yes. I'm like, okay, tell me about them. And you're like, well, this guy at work I sit next to. No, who are your friends? Who are you going to talk to in a crisis? And that's a much different thing.
Well, and one point that I wanted to kind of add there, David, is, and I think he talks about it and Sebastian Junger talks about it in Tribe, is the more we pursue wealth, the more money we have, the less we actually need people, because we can just pay for whatever we need, right? Like we can buy our private plane, we can, have our big house and our fancy cars, and we don't need people to like help us, right? It's no longer like a community event. There's no longer a community garden. You just go and buy your stuff, you have it delivered to your door, right? And so you could be so isolated the more wealth you create. And what of us Americans want to do? We want to create more wealth. We want to get richer, right? And so all that does is just decrease the amount of people that we're actually communing with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think another important point on relationships is, so you look at, so right now the Sussexes are in the news, right? And so how many people in America feel some sort of connection to Prince Harry? Well, Prince Harry doesn't know who any of them are. And so we've got this, like, because of social media, because of uh, different sorts of media, there's this feeling of connection to either politicians or famous people that they don't even know who we are. And so I think that it's kind of this false idea of what relationship really is. Who's the person that's going to show up and help you move? But are you going to show up and help the same person move? That's a relationship. Who can call you at 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, can you call the same person at 2 o'clock in the morning? And if the answer is no, then that's not really a relationship.
Yeah, and I want to be clear on something too, and I think Sebastian Younger points us out as well. Pursuing wealth and pursuing to be in a financial place of less stress and potentially comfort there's nothing wrong with that, and we're not saying that you should. I mean, we're entrepreneurs, right? We're
Yeah, sure.
all everybody on this call is an entrepreneur, and we're not doing it for free. The thing is do you even consider the impact? Are you intentional in pursuing? So like Stu and I on our calendar, every Thursday, like I know, and everybody who knows us knows that Thursday, that you're probably not going to get a lot of productivity out of us for real estate or whatever it is you're trying to do, because most likely we're going to be in the mountains on a snowboard, on a mountain bike. We're going to be having a networking coffee, and the networking is not a business building real estate present. It's, hey, let's just get dudes together to have coffee and see where the conversation goes. That's the intent, right? Thursday is a day that we have designated almost like a Sabbath of sorts to rest, to relax, to play, to have fun, to have enjoyment, and to do it in a community. Very, very intentional. And anybody could do that. We're not special. Anybody could set that up. But it requires a level of intentionality and to question, why am I seeking financial independence, and am I seeking life independence? And what are the impacts of life independence? Because I don't have any friends. And now I want to kill myself, right? Like, these are not huge stretches. These are not, that sounds dramatic, but it's not. And I've seen it play out. And you can see it in your families and your kids, and you really have to guide that, right? You should look in yourself and see where, who, to your point, name the person, put their name on a piece of paper that I can call at 2 o'clock in the morning. They can call me. If there is not a name that readily pops up, do something about it. Yeah. You have to do something about it.
So to me, that then begs the question. So what do you do to actually build friends? And so through my process of, you call it survival, but at the same time, preparing for psychological safety, I've developed what I call a joy fortress. And so everybody wants to be happy and successful. The challenge of success is oftentimes people are chasing someone else's definition of success rather than their own. And again, happiness is fleeting, but how do we create joy? And so, I would describe happiness as the fun I'm having when I go wakeboarding. I love to wakeboard. I do it all the time. But when I park the boat, happiness kind of gets parked there too. But joy, that's deeper. And so how do we get to that? And so from my perspective, there are 4 pillars that are the part of my joy fortress. And it gets back to this relationship idea. But the first is transparency and vulnerability. So the first time that I shared my suicide story on social media, it was truly the scariest thing that I'd ever done, to be that vulnerable. Are people going to think I'm crazy? But what's happened is that vulnerability, this thing that I thought was the scariest thing ever, became a superpower, because I've now had 9 people tell me that they didn't attempt suicide because of me. And so
It's so awesome, dude.
You can't get there without being vulnerable. So people ask me, hey, what's the difference between transparency and vulnerability? I would say transparency is facts. Vulnerability is kind of feelings and relationship stuff. The second of my pillars is gratitude. So how many people do you know who are living with gratitude, so unhappy?
How many?
And so, but the thing about gratitude is you don't fall into gratitude. It's not an accident.
Yeah.
Gratitude this is very deliberate.
Yeah, it's
And
intentional. It's practice.
for me, it was writing things I'm grateful for on a note card every single day until I could actually just believe it. And in the beginning, it was like, I'm grateful I remembered to brush my teeth, right? But over time, it's like, no, like nobody should want the road I took to get here, but everybody should want the life that I have. And so gratitude is the second one. I believe that if you have transparency, vulnerability, and then gratitude, now you have the foundation for actual deep, meaningful relationships. Because who doesn't want to be around grateful people? And then as far as depth of relationship, if I can be entirely vulnerable with you, it tells you can also trust me back. And the output of that meaningful connection built over time. And then the last of my joy fortress kind of pillars is faith. For those non-religious, maybe they'd call it hope or purpose. But kind of this idea that the universe matters more than whatever this little issue that I'm dealing with right now. And if I believe that if you have these four things, transparency, vulnerability, gratitude, deep, meaningful relationship, and faith, your chances of suicide drop to almost zero. And so, how is it that we these things? I think it's just discussions. Hey, this is the benefit of vulnerability, and it's scary, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, man, I love that, and I think you hit something as well. When you talked about gratitude, who doesn't want to be around somebody who is expressing gratitude, right? And I think, to be a beacon is also intentional, and I think to be somebody that to attract like-minded individuals, with these four steps, I mean, the transparency and vulnerability opens so many doors to conversation, right? Like we've seen it, we see it every week. And we've recently seen how it plays out in somebody's life when they go through a significant struggle. And I've seen that in my own life, and the timeline of living in that, because this is not a recipe for a perfect life. We're not going to live that. We're not going to have that. And for those of us with faith who believe, those of us who are faith-based, Christian, folks, like that's not going to happen until I'm not here anymore. And so here, though, on earth, the transparency and vulnerability and this developing these relationships and going through this process, it makes that period, at least for me, it shrinks it significantly. It could literally shrink it to minutes, to seconds, something that I might have lived in for weeks or months. I go next door to Stu and I'm like, hey, dude, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm struggling with. This is how I feel. And I don't like it. And we talk about it and maybe make a couple jokes and laugh. And then you can get out of it pretty quickly, right? You can get into a mind space. You can get somewhere that helps you get out of it to give you tools. And a lot of it's just relationally. And so I love this. I love this 4-step process because it's really not, it gets easier too, right? It's really not that hard. It gets easier. The more times you open up, that first time you said it was the hardest thing in your life. Well, I imagine now it's just like, bleh, you just throw it out there like, because it helps somebody. You have 9 people who are alive because they listened to your story. Dude, that's ridiculous. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and so the first time I posted on social media, I think there were like, I don't know, 1,500 views. This last year, there was like 170,000. And so one of the cool things about vulnerability is we all live in this fear that if they really knew me, they'll love me. Vulnerable, it answers the question. And so these people that aren't going to love you anyways, you really don't need them in your life. So just by the sheer act of vulnerability, what it does is it takes away that opportunity cost from having destructive people in your life. And yes, there's some pain in losing them, but the joy of finding people that you can actually have deep, meaningful relationships with is worth the loss.
I love that, dude. I'm thinking about kind of my own attempts at I guess reinvigorating old relationships that I were hoping for that would become those deep, meaningful relationships again. And most of them haven't worked out, honestly. And at first I was like, man, this kind of sucks, right? Like I was really hoping for that, that old friend from high school to kind of come back into my life and we pick up where we left off. But it doesn't happen that way. But it's these new connections and these people that you really truly can connect with, touch out, hug and reach out and become vulnerable with and share, a deeper conversation than what happened in high school. That's where we're at now. And these guys that are coming into the Storehouse Mastermind are like, I mean, we leave the call saying, I love you. Right. And like, that's the type of meaningful relationship that we're desiring. And there's purpose in that. And there's meaning in that you're sharing this space. Dude, I love your message. I love, that you're using your story to like transform people's lives and like it, dude. I applaud you, man. I love where you're at. I think it's amazing that you make these vulnerable posts and you're saving people's lives. That no question there. I just think it's awesome, man. And I'm so glad that you decided to come on and talk about this on our podcast.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And, so as you talk about high school, I think one of the things that's really important to recognize is that I am not the same human I was in high school. And frankly, I'm not the same person I was a decade ago.
Yeah.
And so as I seek out friends in my life, it's important for me to seek out friends that are either aligned with who I have become or are aligned with where I'm trying to get.
Love that.
And so just because we have some history together, it doesn't mean we have a future together. And, I can still treat you with dignity and respect, but I have become very guarded about the front row of my life. Now there's plenty of room in the second row, but that front row, because I recognize that I'm going to be the average of the 5 people I spend the most time with.
Yeah.
And
dude.
so it has to be intentional. It can't just be, well, they hang out with me and have a beer. Is that getting you where you want to go? From a career perspective, but I think there's far more important things than from a career perspective, from a mental health perspective, from a eternity perspective. And I think you get there by being very deliberate about the people in the front row of your life.
Concur, sir. Concur. Dude, we could probably go on for another hour. There's more conversation that we had planned to talk about, but we're nearing the end. I want to make sure that our listeners can reach out to you. You are teaching this information to Naval Aviation and to leadership, and more people need to hear this message. So how does our listener base reach out to you and get more information?
So people could call me. My phone number is 619-948-8594. Or, I'll when you post this online, I'll tag my email address in it, so that people can shoot me an email if they want. And, although my topic or my primary customer is Naval Aviation, I'm very interested in having this discussion with anybody that wants to have it, because frankly, I think it matters. So happy to have it over and over again.
Dude, I want to affirm you in that. It absolutely matters. It is critical. And as you have experienced and see, it's life-changing and life-saving. And so I just want to encourage you to keep crushing, man. This is a great conversation. I think more men, specifically men, need to hear it, but everybody in a leadership position, men, women alike, need to hear this message. I think we just, when I say men, it's this relational thing, right? We're quite a distance behind. We're trailing women in this front, and we need to get better about it. We need to get transparent. We need to get vulnerable, express our gratitudes, have deep relationships, and ultimately, this faith that we embrace. Man, I love your message. And man, I'm humbled by the fact you join us and that people's lives are being saved just by having a conversation. And so keep it up. Keep it up. It is incredible, and just extremely humbled that you join us.
Thank you for your time, guys. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. Hey, guys and gals, reach out to Alan Greer, also known as Snap. We'll put all of his connection information in the show notes of this podcast. And hey, let's take some action on this. Like, let's practice vulnerability. Let's practice actually really connecting with people on a deep, meaningful level, and not just have conversations about the weather and the football team, right? Let's take some action. Share this episode if this was meaningful to you. Tell somebody about it, especially if they're in leadership roles and they can hear this message. Screenshot, share it, and hey, let's all go fill the storehouse together.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Thanks, friends. Make it a great day.
See ya.
See ya. So I am not going to spend a lot of time recapping. I just want to say one thing. 9 people that reached out to him and specifically highlighted his transparency and vulnerability as being something that caused them to not take their lives.
Yeah, dude.
It's incredible.
That's incredible, man. It's incredible. And that's, that's a scary place, to just be real, right? And be vulnerable. But that becomes your superpower. He said it in his message there. Transparent vulnerability becomes your superpower. So try it, see what happens. It's not that scary after you've practiced it a few times. The other thing is, hey, let's like create some deep, meaningful relationships. Not the stuff over social media, not the heartsies and the likesies, right? Why not try creating some true connections that you are able to hug it out with and hang out with and go do fun stuff together, right? And laugh. Dave and I are trying to do that here locally in Colorado, but we're also doing it in the Storehouse Mastermind. We're doing it on these retreats, the Kinetic Men retreats. We're doing them once a quarter. It's where men get together and hug it out and have fun and go do hard things and laugh and break bread. And there's something magic that happens when you go do this stuff in person. So check it out. All that information, all of our meetups locally here in Colorado and our retreats can be found at storehouse310.com. Check it out. David would love to hug it out with you. I know he would. He does big bear hugs. So come experience one. It's good.
I like to hug. And I can almost guarantee you that you're going to like to be hugged by me. Maybe awkward.
20-second hugs.
Maybe awkward, but you will leave there feeling better.
Debatable, but go try.
No, not debatable. It's 100% true. See ya. See ya. Thank you, friends, for listening to Filling the Storehouse. If you are growth-minded, community-focused, and willing to take uncommon action to redefine success and live an abundant life, visit our website at www.storehouse310.com to see all the ways we can connect.
Yeah, on our website, you can find information on everything we're doing, like joining our meetup page to get the details on our webinars and our local Thursday gatherings here in Colorado. From our site, you can also find information on and sign up for our next retreat. Finally, we always appreciate your love and support. Please share this episode and go rate us on your podcast player of choice.
Thank you again. Now go fill the storehouse.